can't think of anything more relevant a subject than the one on anti-Semitism we're going to look at this morning. It is a unique hatred, and it's one that, despite all our supposed cold tolerances of minority groups and whatever, it's just bubbling away and getting worse and worse and worse. So I'm really looking forward to this, Rabbi, and looking forward to hearing your insights on this. I've got a lot of thoughts myself on it. I'll be very interested to hear your perspective. So without any further ado, over to you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Barry, and welcome to everybody. Unfortunately, it's still anti-Semitism still continues to be a timely topic, and therefore I'm not going to obviously cover everything. I just thought today I'm going to specifically focus a little bit about the nature of anti-Semitism, and then look at the core reasons behind Nazi anti-Semitism. And as we'll see, there are different manifestations of anti-Semitism that have been throughout the ages, but ultimately it comes back to a spiritual source. I think let's begin by just sharing, Rabbi, some words from Rabbi Sachs in terms of a definition. So, David, I can see you, so go for it.
Let me define anti-Semitism. Not liking Jews is not anti-Semitism. We all have people we don't like. That's human. It's not dangerous. Second, criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitism. I was recently talking to some school children and they asked me, is criticizing Israel anti-Semitism? I said, no. I asked them, do you believe you have a right to criticize the British government? They all put their hands up. Then I asked, which of you believes that Britain has no right to exist? No one put up their hands. Now you know the difference. Anti-Semitism means denying the right of Jews to exist collectively as Jews with the same rights as everyone else. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs.
Yeah. We'll just hear some further reflections from him about the evolution of anti-Semitism, and he has really coined an interesting phrase. He calls it a mutating virus.
Anti-Semitism is the world's oldest hatred. And anti-Semitism, if you think about it, doesn't make sense in any normal sense. Because normally, hatred is for a reason. But anti-Semitism is completely irrational. So in the 19th century, Jews were hated because they were communist and because they were capitalist. They were hated because they were rich and because they were poor. They were hated because they kept to themselves, and they were hated because they infiltrated everything and got everywhere. They were hated because, on the one hand, Voltaire saw them as a people rooted in a superstitious ancient faith. They were hated because the communists thought they were rootless cosmopolitans who believed nothing. So anti-Semitism at every level is a contradiction in terms. How then do we understand it? Anti-Semitism is a virus. Now, the body has this extraordinarily sophisticated thing called the immune system, which protects it against viruses. So how do viruses infiltrate the body's immune system? The answer is that viruses mutate. And that's what anti-Semitism has done over time. It mutates. So here is a brief history of anti-Semitism. In the ancient world, the Greeks and some of the Roman writers were critical of Jews. And often people see that as anti-Semitism. Actually, it wasn't. Because the Greeks thought that everyone who wasn't a Greek was a barbarian. So, as they say in the mafia, just before they shoot you, nothing personal, strictly business. So Greek and Hellenistic anti-Jewish writings are not really anti-Semitic. They're just anti-foreigner. They are xenophobia. They're not Judeophobia, hatred of the people not like us. So when does anti-Semitism really begin? The short answer is, sadly, it begins with Christianity. For the first time, Christians hated Jews specifically, not just in general. Why? Because they, in so many words, rejected their own Messiah. From that moment, it became personal, focused, targeted. And that was the birth, if you like, of what I would call religious anti-Judaism. That is Mark 1. The next mutation occurs somewhere around 1096, the First Crusade, when Jews were massacred across Europe by the Crusaders on the way to liberate the Holy Land. That was not just hatred of Jews because they weren't Christians. That was what I call demonic anti-Semitism. All of a sudden, Jews were not just the people who rejected Christianity, but they were guilty of desecrating the host, poisoning the wells, spreading the plague, the blood libel. All of a sudden, Christianity began to see Jews as a malevolent force of evil in the world. Satan, the infidel, the Antichrist. That was anti-Semitism Mark II. Anti-Semitism Mark III, we can date precisely 1879. The word anti-Semitism was coined in that year by a German journalist called Wilhelm Marr. And of course, that was different from the anti-Semitism of the past, because this was not religious, it was racial. And the second racial anti-Semitism was born, the whole history became much more tragic, because you can change your religion, but you can't change your race. Christians might work for the conversion of Jews, but racial anti-Semites could only work for the, God forbid, extermination of Jews. And we are living through the fourth mutation. The fourth mutation is what I would call religious anti-Zionism. All of a sudden, Jews are attacked not as individuals, but as a nation in its own land. And we suddenly become the one people on earth who are not entitled to have a land, a country, a society of their own. And that, of course, becomes anti-Semitism when all Jews are presumed to be Zionists and therefore guilty of the primal sin of wanting a country of their own. So that is anti-Semitism Mark IV, and that is where we're at the moment. Anti-Semitism.
A brief synopsis.
If I can make a comment there, Rabbi, very seldom would I disagree with Rabbi Sachs, but I do think that anti-Semitism started well before the advent of Christianity, although Christianity took it to a whole new level. I think you can go right back to Genesis and see the genesis of anti-Semitism way back there.
Actually agree with you. It's because the anti-Semitism really began with Abraham when he came up with the concept of monotheism, which was introduced into a pagan world. Yes, I do agree with you. Anyway, I don't know why I chose the timeline there. Just a personal anecdote. My father was a Holocaust survivor. We came to Australia in the 60s, and we were walking to the synagogue one Saturday morning, and a car, drives past, calls out bloody Jews. My father's, I just love this country. And I said, why? He says, in Poland they stopped and they beat me up. Here they keep driving on. The other observation which he really made in the Australia of the 60s is very xenophobic, and he says, I love this country, they hate the Italians, the Greeks, Lebanese, and I hate the Jews, I can take that. Whereas in Poland, they exclusively hated Jews, and that's really, that's why it was totally different there in Poland in particular. But look, there's so much to unpack here, but just to touch base with some key points about the uniqueness of anti-Semitism. Number one, its longevity. It's literally been around since Abraham. Its most hatreds at some point peter out. It's universal. It's not restricted to one region. As Rabbi Sachs also touched upon, there's really confusion as to the core cause, that Jews are, on one hand, they're being, in certain times of history, they're criticised for being lazy, then they're criticised for dominating the economy. On one hand, they're criticised for being separate, wearing distinct clothing, and there in Germany, when they actually tried to assimilate, they were then threatened with trying to undermine the racial purity of Germany. And the other thing, unfortunately, it's not a mild hatred. It's a very intense hatred that, people are intolerant sometimes of other groups, but we make a few jokes here and there. But here, as we've seen, physical examples throughout history of genocide, of obviously the Holocaust was the peak of that. Of course, what happened on October 7th is another example of this.
Anti-Semitism is unlike any other form of hatred throughout history. Let's break down why. Universality. No matter where the Jews have been, Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, they've always faced hatred. Longevity. Anti-Semitism has been around for thousands of years, but it really kicked into high gear with the rise of Christianity and Islam. Intensity. Discrimination against Jews often turns real ugly real fast. It can escalate into false accusations, mass expulsions, violent mobs, murders, and even genocide.
Yeah, this is the anti-Semitism of what we've done. Again, there's a lot to talk about, and I can spend, as I have in the past, talking about each one of the reasons for anti-Semitism. So I'm just going to touch base here, because the focus really today is Nazi anti-Semitism and really the anecdote to bring that out, but the traditional reasons and not causes for anti-Semitism have been that they're hated because they possess too much wealth and power. I mean, the stark reality is, if one looks at history, there have been isolated examples of some Jewish people that have been wealthy, but throughout certainly Europe, they were confined to ghettos in Russia. They were sent to what was called the Pale of the Settlement, and it was just really quite impoverished. There's a cute story of a beggar once that comes to Baron Rothschild, and he knocks on the door, and he says he wants to see the Baron, he wants to make a donation. So the footman opens the door, the Baron is very sick, and he apologizes that he can't see you. So the beggar, with true Jewish chutzpah, says, look, I've got a cure for him. So the footman goes up to the Baron, says, this beggar at the door says he's got a cure for your illness. Fine, let him in, what do I have to lose? So the Baron says, well, tell me, what cure do you have for me? And he says, move into the Jewish ghetto. And the Baron says, are you absolutely mad? It's overcrowded. It's full of disease. It's next to the sewer. How can you ever suggest that? He says, Baron, very simply, a rich man has never died in that ghetto. So conversely, also they've been times criticised for being the chosen people, but the stark reality is that most nations believe they are chosen to some extent. They've been used as scapegoats, but here too, it's a chicken and an egg theory. I mean, if Hitler would have said, for example, the bicycle riders are the cause of our downfall, they would have thought that he was mad. But because they're tapping into a traditional hatred of the Jewish people, therefore they were always an easy scapegoat. Certainly a lot of history with the church, which has not been that great throughout the Middle Ages. They were criticised for being outsiders, but again in Germany, when they wanted to assimilate, they were then said, you can't do this because you are trying to become part of us, and that's what Hitler tapped in, the racial theory. So there's a mix of all these things that have been used. I just want to share with you, because I'm just heading towards Nazi anti-Semitism. I'm not going to do this whole clip, because it's 11 minutes, but we'll just start, I think, at 2 minutes. It's just important to understand how the Nazis utilised and tapped into some of these reasons, but as I'll share with you, I don't believe that was the core reason for the hatred. Okay.
Where did the Nazis derive these ideas? And to what extent were their ideas in sync with the world at the time? We should first note that everything that Hitler and the Nazi believers argued had been said before. The Nazi worldview claimed to be scientific, and indeed it based itself on and drew from various scientific developments in the modern era. Let's take a look at some of the various sources from which the Nazis drew. Christian anti-Judaism, the development of new fields of research in social sciences and humanities, particularly philology and anthropology, the development of modern racism, particularly the theory of evolution, genetics and eugenics, and modern anti-Semitism. Christian anti-Judaism from early Christian times onward was essentially an attack on Jewish belief. The Jews were accused of deicide, rejecting and then killing the Messiah that God had sent. They were accused of blinding themselves to the truth, and hence Christianity had replaced Judaism as the new Israel. Jews were accused of being in league with the devil and of engaging in evil practices, such as the charge that they kill Christian children to use their blood in rituals, the so-called blood libel. Still, at its core, this attack sought to convert the Jews to what Christians believed was the one truth, Christianity. The treatment of the Jews was often brutal and at times murderous, but this anti-Judaism left open an escape clause for Jews: conversion. Any Jew who converted to Christianity essentially solved the problem. Yet this anti-Judaism also left an imprint on European society and its view of the Jews. And the Nazis used this imprint to good advantage in gaining tacit or active support in Germany and all of Europe. Philosophical and scientific developments in the 18th and 19th centuries both advanced societies and justified inequality at the same time. Whereas Christian belief and the new modern secular humanism shared a conviction that all human beings are potentially equal, whether because they are created in God's image or because all are born equal, some scholars in the new fields of philology, anthropology, and biology sought to exploit these sciences in order to demonstrate the supposed inherent inequality of peoples. Many of these scientific pioneers argued that the differences between languages, peoples, and cultures pointed to the superiority of some over others. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution provided these scientists the missing scientific theory that helped explain common origins to seemingly disparate things. Many philologists pointed to the Indo-European languages, a new concept of a language group, as the most developed and superior language family, while many anthropologists pointed to some European cultures as more developed and advanced than other cultures. Their research seemed to provide a scientific underpinning for the racist theories that developed, and Nazi theorists and supporters later seized on these ideas and tried unsuccessfully to provide scientific evidence to support them. The important sociologist and physiologist Herbert Spencer promoted a theory known as social Darwinism in the 1850s. in contrast to Darwin's theory of evolutionary development in the plant and animal worlds through natural selection over eons of time. Spencer argued for struggle and the survival of the fittest in the human social order in the present tense. He believed the strong must rule and the weak must submit. By the mid-1800s, racism that claimed to be scientifically based had become widely accepted. But this modern racism saw not only people of dark skin as inferior, but also divided white people into races. Count Joseph Arthur de Gobineau's 1855 book on the inequality of the races based itself on research in philology and anthropology to argue that the white races are superior to the black and yellow, and that the Aryans are the superior race among white races. The field of eugenics grew out of research into genetics and heredity. By the early 1880s, Francis Galton had developed the idea that societies should promote the propagation of certain desirable traits. This could, for example, help eliminate certain diseases. Positive eugenics advocated encouraging procreation between those with desirable traits, while negative eugenics advocated limiting or preventing procreation between people with undesirable traits. University genetics departments were created in Western countries, many of which employed national eugenic policies in the 20th century. The Nazis seized upon these ideas as part of the basis to subjugate, persecute, or even destroy various kinds of people. Developments in science and other fields impacted on Europeans' attitudes toward Jews. Jews continued to be generally perceived as strangers in society, bearers of a foreign language, culture, religion, and mores. Modern intellectuals' animus against Jews could no longer be based on religious belief, but rather on science, supposedly. Modern anti-Semitism emerged. Like the new social sciences and political theories, anti-Semitism too claimed to be scientific. Anti-Semitism supposedly harked to science as the basis for its antagonism to Jews. Anti-Semitism, a term coined by Wilhelm Marr in 1879, was ideological, racist, political, and organized. The Jews were now viewed as an evil and destructive race, an evil that was immutable, which meant that the Jews' increasing integration into society should be reversed. The Nazi worldview coalesced in an age of ideologies. From the mid-19th century to nearly the mid-20th century, many competing and conflicting ideologies arose, seeking to explain the world and society and claiming to have the formula to make a perfect world. Adolf Hitler and his followers also claimed to explain and fix the world to perfection. They drew upon scientific and other modern developments and merged these ideas with German folkish ideology, a German racial nationalistic ideology that saw all Germans as organically, biologically connected to each other and to the soil of their country. It was in his book Mein Kampf, published in 1925, and in subsequent talks and actions, that Hitler developed this into a worldview that turned society, morality, and the world as we know it on its head. Ultimately, the Nazi worldview led to many policies that were based on the 19th and early 20th century's scientific and ideological developments, such as Lebensraum, living space, based on the false contention that Germany is the most overcrowded country and Germans have the right to expand eastward in order to gain living space, or Operation T4, the so-called euthanasia program, in which some 200,000 German and Austrian mentally handicapped people were murdered, and most pronouncedly, the Nazi campaign against the Jews. Nazi policy making in 1933 to 1945.
Okay, let's just, I just want to share with that background, which just gives an understanding of where they were coming from. The point is that they were so obsessed with the Jews that even at the end of the war, where Hitler had a choice of sending trains to assist his soldiers at the front or sending Jews to the gas chamber, he chose to send the Jews to the gas chamber. And whilst they had all these policies, countries compromise on policies and implementation. In this particular case, there was no compromise on this particular goal of destroying the Jews. And therefore, this sort of leads to an analysis of really what was at the heart of this. And as we'll see actually from Hitler's own writings, the source of and the real cause of his anti-Semitism. So the Talmud, perhaps Michael, you wanted to share this?
Okay. Biblical source for anti-Semitism. Why was the Torah given on a mountain called Sinai, asks the Talmud? Because the great Sinai, the tremendous hatred aimed at the Jew emanates from Sinai.
The word Sinai in Hebrew means hatred, so there's a play on words. Where did this hatred begin? It actually began at Mount Sinai. You just finish up there?
At Sinai, Jews were told that there is one God who makes moral demands of all humanity.
In the ancient world, there was one rule. It was called the Golden Rule. The man who had the gold is the man that made the rule. Torah came along and said, no, the widows, the orphans, the poor, they all have equal rights. And that view confronted many at that time. The other thing at that time, it was a pagan world, and here monotheism, one God, is introduced. And the prime example of that hatred was right at the start when the Amalekites attacked the Jews for no reason after the giving of the Torah, because they were confronted by this ideology. So instead of embracing it, they sought to destroy it. Who did they destroy? Or at least try to destroy is the Jews. Barry, you want to read, Barry? Do you need time? Yeah.
I have summoned you with righteousness. I will strengthen your hand. I will protect you. I make a covenant with you to be a light unto the nations. Isaiah 42:6. And you shall be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Jeremiah 19:6. For you shall be a kingdom of priests to instruct all of mankind to call out in unison in the name of God.
So as Jews, we were given this message to share with all of humanity that there is one God. And as we'll soon see, this is really at the heart of Nazi anti-Semitism.
What I find more frightening and saddening than the thousands of rockets flying over my head here in Jerusalem, or the rioting and hatred in Lud and Haifa, in Akko and in Sheikh Jarrah, is the surfacing of virulent anti-Semitism in London, in New York, and in Canada, the capitals of the world. Why is it that, far from being a thing of the past, anti-Semitism continues to fester beneath the surface, ready to erupt whenever there's the slightest pretext? In early 1941, almost the entire Mir Yeshiva escaped from Vilna to Kobe in Japan and thence to Shanghai in China. One day, one of the Yeshiva Bochrim, one of the Torah students, was making his way through the market in Shanghai, and above the many voices speaking in Chinese, he heard a voice bellowing in a language he understood. It was coming from a radio in an upstairs apartment. The voice was screaming like an animal. It was saying, "Come, let us rid ourselves of this people who will not let us live in peace." And behind the voice there rose up in a rhythmic chant thousands of voices, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil. The boy was shaken. He ran back to the yeshiva and he told Rav Chetzkel Levenstein what he'd seen. Rav Levenstein said to him, this time he's telling the truth. This time he's telling the truth. The Jewish people will not let the world live in peace. Hermann Rauschning, in his book Gespräch mit Hitler, writes that Hitler said to him, the tablets of Mount Sinai have lost their validity. Conscience is a Jewish invention. Like circumcision, it mutilates man. Conscience comes from Sinai. The Torah mandated a revolution in human behavior. Education for all, the sanctity of human life, equality before the law, a vision of world peace where nations would beat their swords into plowshares, the moral imperative to care for the sick, the aged, the orphan, the widow. The Jewish people will not let the world live in peace. Our sages teach us that Mount Sinai, or Sinai in Hebrew, is connected to the word Sina, which means hatred. When the Torah descended to this world, it was accompanied by anti-Semitism. One of the Torah's great gifts to the world is the verse in Vayikra, Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. The Torah came into a world which believed in love yourself, pamper yourself, spend on yourself, grab for yourself, murder for yourself, indulge yourself, go for it. The me generation is ageless. Why should I be surprised at the poisonous hatred of Jews in the capitals of the world? Has anything really changed in the last few thousand years? Is the world less violent, less hedonistic, less selfish than it ever was? And has the world yet hearkened to the Torah's message, love your neighbor as yourself? We are the nation that will not let the world live in peace.
As at the heart of Hitler's core philosophy, it was I don't want to stand still. Hitler was essentially a pagan, and in the pagan world, it was the survival of the fittest. We've said it, but it's just worth repeating. Tony, you want to read?
John, have you got?
The Jews have inflicted two wounds on mankind, circumcision on its body and conscience on its soul. They are Jewish inventions. I am freeing humanity from the shackles of the soul, from the degrading suffering caused by the false vision called conscience and ethics. Adolf Hitler quoted in the Hitler Speaks by Hermann Rauschning.
I mean, he said it all so clearly. Barry, do you want to? Donna, there we go.
Sure. The Hitler used sang these songs. We have no need for Christian virtue. Our leader is our savior. The Pope and the Rabbi should be gone. We shall be pagan once again.
Don't think it can be clearer than that.
Yeah.
No? Wow.
I just want to mention, actually, in the clip before, one of the escape routes, one of the rare escape routes for Jews during the Holocaust was to Shanghai. And it was thanks to, firstly, Ambassador Ho in Vienna, which Donna has made a video, who issued visas, and Ambassador Sugahati from China. I think he was based in Lithuania, that issued visas for Jews to go to Shanghai, and then there was a refuge there where tens of thousands of Jews sat out the war in relative peace and calm.
What astounds me with that song is, why didn't the church in the 1930s and 40s wake up to that? My goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another whole discussion about Pope Pius at that time. But he just says it so openly here. And just actually, Barry, just want to read these two quotes here.
Yeah. Hitler viewed National Socialism as a new world order, a way to create mankind anew. The Jewish nation was his mortal enemy and so became his target for absolute destruction. The struggle for world domination will be fought entirely between us, between Germans and Jews. All else is facade and illusion. Even when we have driven the Jew out of Germany, he remains our world enemy. If only one country, for whatever reason, tolerates a Jewish family in it, that family will become the germ center for fresh sedition. If one little Jewish boy survives without any Jewish education, with no synagogue and no Hebrew school, Judaism is in his soul.
That's why he killed that children as well were exterminated in the death camps, because he saw that threat. Thank God, mainly led by Pope John Paul II, and after the Holocaust, the Vatican began to reassess its past history and philosophies, and Pope John Paul, the predecessor Pope Benedict, was the first pope to travel to Israel. He went to the wall, he there asked forgiveness, and he was actually the first pope to step inside a synagogue. As an interesting piece of trivia, he left his final possessions, Pope John Paul II, to the chief rabbi of Rome. Here's a very moving address by Pope Benedict, his successor, when he went to Auschwitz, which really encapsulates a lot of what we've discussed. Barry, do you want to pick somebody?
Yeah, what about you? John, are you there? You unmute?
Yeah, okay, deep down, those vicious criminals.
So you're quoting the Pope here, John. So.
Yep, well, that's appropriate. By wiping out this people wanted to kill the God who called Abraham, who spoke on Sinai and laid down principles to serve as a guide for mankind, principles that are eternally valid. If this people, the Jews, by its very existence, was a witness to the God who spoke to humanity, then that God finally had to die and power had to belong to man alone. By destroying Israel, they ultimately wanted to tear up the taproot of the Christian faith and replace it with a faith of their own invention, faith in the rule of man, the rule of the powerful. Good old, that's a good speech.
Yeah, which is again essentially saying the same thing, that it's the survival of the fittest and the strongest, and that's why the Jews are really the antithesis for this. Again, much more can be said about the solution, but the irony is the solution of anti-Semitism is that we must really re-embrace ethical monotheism. Barry, do you want to?
All right, Sandra, can you unmute and go with it?
Okay. The solution to anti-Semitism. Mankind must absorb that message, the centrality of the God and divine ethics. Jews and non-Jews must therefore resume their original task of spreading ethical monotheism. It is the exquisite irony of Jewish history that this task, which has been the ultimate cause of anti-Semitism, must be fulfilled in order to end anti-Semitism. The Jews must make the world aware of two basic principles. Ethics need God, and God's major demand is ethics. We must oppose religionists of any religion who advocate God without depicting goodness as God's central concern. Likewise, oppose secularists who advocate a value system devoid of religious and moral values, for then ethics become relative. God without ethics has led to crusades, ISIS ideologies, gulags and Auschwitz.
The core is, and much more can be said, as the first and fifth commandment. First, and Again, according to the rabbis, you can actually read the commandments not only down but across. The first commandment is thou shalt have no other gods, and the parallel opposite to that, the sixth commandment, is you shouldn't murder. If you believe in God and truly believe in God, you cannot murder another human being who's been created in the image of God. And conversely, you cannot have a value of not killing people without the underpinning of believing in a God. And we've seen that, unfortunately, play out in history, where justification has been found for murder. So let's just wrap up with this final video.
Anti-Semitism. It is the most amazing, the most awesome thing in the world. We live in Minnesota. You go up a couple of hours north into the Iron Range, Indian reservations. They've never seen a Jew in the world. They've never seen a Jew. They hate Jews. What? How is this? This is a miracle. What is this phenomenon? The way it started is this. Every person chose a god, every nation chose a religion, and by that they related to the Creator and earned their way to heaven or the blessings on earth or whatever it was. Then the Jews come along and they say, no, we're Jewish, even if we don't believe in God. They say, wait a minute, that's not fair. What makes you the exception? The same is true with the land of Israel. Every country is up for grabs. Every country has been occupied, and what the occupiers turn it into their country. The Angles took over England, so it became England. But Israel? No. The Babylonians capture Israel, it's Israel. It never became Babylonia. The Romans conquered Israel. Was it ever Rome? No, it was never Rome. It was Israel. Wait a minute. What makes Israel the exception? Take a look at the Torah. Right from the beginning, what caused all the problems? What caused all the hatred? Jealousy. What was the problem, Cain and Hevel? They had the whole world to themselves and they couldn't share it? Jealousy. What was the problem between Yitzchak and Yishmael? Jealousy. What was the problem between Yaakov and Esau? What was the problem between Yosef and his brothers? Anti-Semitism is jealousy. And the jealousy comes either because they feel that we have something that they don't have, or our existence makes them feel that they are empty. So what's the solution? Let's be friends. Why can't we love each other and get along? Not good enough. That's just a ceasefire. That's not real peace. This is the good news. If you read the secondary stories, in every case where there was an anti-Semitic attack, the entire non-Jewish community came out in support of the Jews. That doesn't make headlines, but it's true. So the anti-Semitism of today, the darkness of today, is simply a total lack of knowledge. It's the absence of light, which is dangerous, but curable. But we have to do our part. What is our part? Speaking to the world about right and wrong, about holiness, about godliness. We have to bring God back to the world because the world has lost touch. So what makes a Jew Jewish? Not the religion. In fact, Judaism is not a religion. We are his people doing what he needs done. You are Jewish. So God expects of you something different than he expects of a non-Jew. They are the nations of the world, meaning they are responsible for the world's condition. Our job is to bring God to the world. So if non-Jews are raising the world towards God, and we are bringing God more and more into the world, we are bringing heaven and earth together. And when we bring heaven and earth together, it is more godly, more divine than heaven itself. We are the light to the nations. It's our job to inspire them in their part of this project. We haven't done that very much because for most of our history, if we offered an opinion, we were shot. But now, the world is desperate to hear from us. It's become very apparent to Christians, to Muslims, that their innovation on the Bible has not been good. So now they want to know, what was the original Bible? How did the Jews understand it 1,000 years before there was Christianity? We can now really be a light to the nations because they're listening. And what is the message that we should give our non-Jewish neighbors? God needs you more than you need him. Spread the word.
On that note,
Yeah, that's very instructive, Rabbi. I wonder if another dynamic
let me
is
just,
entered.
once I've got, yeah, I'm good. You just want to stop the recording for a sec?
Yeah.